Hi everyone, welcome to tonight's ThinkIn, where we're going to be looking at sneakers and sneaker culture. It might have not have escaped your notice that I am not Joella Noble. In fact, she was held up at a previous filming commitment. So you've got me looking after you for the next hour, and you're in very safe hands. At least I think you're in very safe hands. I guess you can be the judge of that in about 58 minutes time. Fortunately, you haven't got to listen to me for an hour because we've got three really interesting guests who absolutely know their stuff when it comes to sneakers. I should say, full disclosure, that I'm pretty much just a spectator when it comes to trainers. You'll find me in a pair of Chucks. I'm a big fan of Adidas Crazy Chaos. And that's about as far as it goes. I'm probably what you would call pretty high street when it comes to trainers. That said, doing the research for this, I now know the difference between betas and grails and holy grails, and maybe I'll get some of our invited experts to explain what some of those terms mean in a bit. So sneakers are big business. It's a global market worth $80 billion, and it's growing all the time. The sums of money involved on individual pairs of shoes are frankly astonishing. And there's a whole ecosystem of buyers, sellers, collectors, agents, fans, people hunting down rare shoes. It's got its own language, and it spreads across so many different subcultures, and it's kind of different everywhere you go in the world. So, oh, I should point out, my colleague Zav, he's going to be looking after you in the chat this evening. So please tell him stories about your favorite trainers. Ask him any questions you've got about trainers, because we can put those to our guests. And yeah, we'll kick off. So part of the inspiration for this ThinkIn was the Sneakers Unboxed exhibition, which is currently showing at the Design Museum. It runs until October, and we are really fortunate to have the fantastic Ligaya Salazar here with us this evening, who is the curator of that exhibition. So I'm going to jump straight in, Ligaya. Where do you even start trying to tell the story of trainers?
Yeah, it's a good question. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I guess I had a bit of a parameter being at the Design Museum. I guess it was really important to look at the kind of story of sneakers from a design perspective. And as it is, and then lots of people have asked me this before, it's like, why sneakers? Why at the Design Museum? And to me, it seemed like crazy that it hadn't happened before, truly, at a design museum anyway, because it is like potentially the most readily available, recognizable designed object that we, deal with in terms of our, I guess, in terms of our wardrobe, at least. Maybe not in, the Coca-Cola bottle is probably more recognizable. But I think having that perspective as a designed object is where it started. And I guess the way in which the exhibition looks at it is in two parts, really. I mean, there's an introductory space where people who don't know anything about sneakers can kind of get familiarized with the way in which it's kind of taken over people's lives, and how, and probably also wardrobes and attics and etc. But really the show is in two parts, one's style and one's performance. And I decided very early on to start with style, because really the origins of sneaker culture are really sit with young people, and young people adopting sneakers as something that is valuable, is status driven, is something that you can be seen as the cooler person in the room. So that's why it started with style. And really, when you look at sneaker culture now and how big it is and how many fashion brands engage with this, obviously it helped provide an arc and kind of introduce people into what sneaker culture is about. And then you go into the design story of sneakers, and you encounter very early Converse. As you are a fan of Converse, we have some of the earliest ones in the exhibition. But then it examines the story of design through kind of a series of design concerns that designers have been trying to address, whether that's fit, comfort, Cushioning, obviously, the Nike Air story is a big story in there, all the way to what is the kind of final part of the exhibition, which is looking at sustainability, but both in terms of how brands are trying to tackle, what is basically a very, very wasteful and impactful industry, to also how consumers are doing it. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I don't know if you want any more from me.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. Thanks. What I'm really interested in is there like a point in history where trainers flipped from just being something that we wore on our feet so we didn't hurt the soles of our feet, to being a kind of highly prized collectible fashion item? Or is it more amorphous than that?
It's definitely more amorphous than that, but I would say that it's probably it starts really in all the way after the post-war culture. There's lots of different sneakers that get adopted by young people, but it's when, I guess, the turning point is when brands recognize it and start selling it back to the consumers and start creating limited editions and kind of manufacturing this desire that was there before, but there sometimes just because it was an accident. I think in terms of like Adidas, for example, in the late 70s and early 80s in the States, the reason why they were so desirable because they weren't readily available, and that was because Adidas had, distribution problems in the States. So there's this idea of like, limited stock, but this limited stock happened for different reasons all the way, until the kind of late 90s. And then even then throughout the early 2000s, it's still quite a small group of people that are really interested in kind of copying the pairs. Whereas now I feel it's just become a very wide, a much wider field. And I know that Derek probably will be talking about this. I think the female aspect of this has really grown in the last 5-10 years. And that was really not so much visible at least not visible, but there was always female sneakerheads. But I think now it's become a much bigger, much broader interest point.
And the point you made about how sort of scarcity in one country or production issues in one country kind of led to an increase in, I guess, the appeal because of the rarity somewhere else. I think that's really interesting as well. The story that struck me from the exhibition was the one where you had northern football fans in like the 70s, and they're all wearing shoes that were designed for like not for German football fans.
Yeah. I mean, I think the story of terrace culture and Adidas is a really fascinating story. Now, for me, that the story you're referring to, which is the Adidas trim trap, which is an icon of I guess, football terrace culture, is particularly funny because I'm half German, and for me, trim traps are associated fully with middle-aged men in Germany who they were made for, because there was a initiative called Trim Dich, which is like to basically trying to encourage middle-aged men and middle-aged women to exercise more in the woods. And they had these fitness paths that were kind of created throughout, like, wooded areas near urban cities, and the Adidas trim trap was the shoe to wear with that. So I always like the story that it's become this kind of style icon of a youth tribe in the UK, because it, for me, obviously has very different associations.
That's a brilliant story. So I guess that feels like a good time to bring in Harry. Harry Bartlett, he is a self-proclaimed sneakerhead. I'm not gonna share any spoilers with his life story. So Harry, do you just want to tell us about kind of your coming out, if you like, as a sneakerhead, and kind of your teenage years trading and how you got into it?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Harry, 26, I'm from London. Basically, when I was in school, I got addicted to basketball from a very young age, probably about the age of 12, and I was playing with my friends. And when you get to a certain level, you want to look like the people you're seeing on TV. You want to be able to dunk, shoot, and there's a saying in the NBA, look good, play good. So, being 14-year-old, prepubescent, well, mid-pubescent, not being able to jump very high, I wanted to look like LeBron or whoever it was at the time. And I just wanted to put on, you know, the coolest sneakers on my foot on the court and off the court. So I wanted the performance shoes for the court and I wanted the retros off the court. And so the retros were mainly Jordans for me. They were Jordan's first shoes from 1985 all the way through to, you know, I think at the time it was Jordan 13s I probably stopped my collection at, which were 13 years after that.
And when did you get your first pair of trainers?
My first pair, I remember I bought a pair of Flights from Westfield, White City, from a sales section in Sports Direct, and I loved them. They didn't make it very long. They broke about a year later, but then I started collecting Jordans pretty soon after the age of 15. I remember I was collecting, one of my first pairs was a Spizike, which was Spike Lee, the infamous director, collab with Jordan Brand. It was a mashup, a fusion shoe, as well as a pair of Flyweights, which were Dwayne Wade, my favorite basketball player shoe at the time. So I was literally just trying to look good. And from then,
sorry to interrupt. Well, what is it about the shoes? Like, is it the smell? Is it the feel? Is it a particular thing about the look? What do you think is the attraction moment?
So for me, for basketball shoes, they were always very different because they were made for quite a big athlete, you know, 6 foot plus, you know, the average height in the NBA is 6'7". So they're made for big guys to be able to perform well. So they don't always look too traditional. They might have started a bit more, you know, classic based, looking like a blazer, you know, with leather and rubber soles. But as time has gone on, they become more and more fierce silhouettes. And those are the ones that have attracted me a bit more in my youth, you know. The Jordan 11, which is a really pivotal shoe, looks, you know, like no other sneaker before it, really. And, you know, that was the sneaker that I remember was where I saw on Black Friday shops being broken down into for the Jordan 11 Concord when I was about 17, 18. And that's when I noticed these sneakers were a serious thing. You know, when you saw people smashing through shop windows and pushing people out of the way on the news. And I think that, for me, was the moment where it all took off. And I then, you know, it didn't just have that draw that I wanted to look like these players. I wanted to be one of those guys getting that grail into my hands.
So at the height of your collection, how many pairs of sneakers are we looking at?
I've lost count, but I'm probably a good around 80 pairs, I'd say. I think I'm about 80. So it's nothing.
Are they all wrapped up safely in their boxes in like an air-conditioned, airtight?
They are. Some of them are very dear to me. I know I've got the Adidas Dragon Ball Z collection, which, if you're familiar with Dragon Ball Z, it's an anime. I managed to collect all 8 pairs of those shoes representing the characters, and they put together to make a collection out of the anime, which they're very dear to me, those boxes. But some of them are a bit worse for wear. They've been crushed after I've gone to uni and back with them, you know, and you know, gone through renting houses and stuff like that. So they tell a story, you know. They tell an interesting story.
Give me. We'll come to Derek in a moment to talk about like how the trading works. But I guess just from your point of view, from a collector back in your teenage years, give us like a quick crash course in, you know, I've got 100 quid. I've walked into Foot Locker. I've got £100. How quickly can I turn that into £5,000 or a decent pair of trainers? So
with these pairs, when I was collecting probably around age 16, about 10 years ago, the shoes wouldn't release as per se sit in the shop floor for so long. Sometimes they did, and they were more in your more boutique outlet stores. But if you went to central London, you'd have to know when the shoe was dropping. So let's say I've got the Jordan 3, one of my favorite models in my hand. This is probably one of my favorite models of all time. This would be releasing at a certain day, at a certain time in Nike, let's say 8 a.m. it would normally be, and you'd have to get into a queue at Oxford Circus. And there would be this guy called Totti, I remember him very well, he was Filipino. He would be at the front of every queue in his camping chair with his little anorak on, and he'd be there writing a list down. And you'd go to Totti at the front, you say, I'm Harry, I'm here. And then he say, you're number 30 in the queue, and you go, okay, cool. And he said, I do the roll call every 2 hours. So 8, 10, 12, 2, 4, 6, 8. And if you miss one roll call, because a lot of people would live not too far away, an hour away, and they go home, sleep, and come back to the queue in the morning. So he would, you've missed one, you get a strike. If you get 2 strikes, you're out. And there was an interest, you know, for Nike and for us not to cause carnage in the queue because they cancel the release and no one gets shoes. So we'd hand this list over to the Nike security would take over at 6 a.m. 2 hours before. They'd call us in one by one. We get our shoe. Hopefully, if you're lucky enough, you get to Foot Locker and size after it, and you get 3 pairs. For me, I was selling 2, keeping 1. So I would probably get my shoe for free and get a bit of profit off the top. So that's how it was. But now those days are gone, and we're on online raffles and lotteries, and
So explain the online raffle. Give me a quick kind of run through of how the online raffle.
So if you use Nike sneakers as probably the most prominent of the apps, you log into the app and it would say the Jordan 3, if we're using this as an example, would be dropping on Saturday, whatever 16th at this time. You could set a reminder on your phone and you get a little notification saying the Jordan's dropping. You'd enter a virtual queue or a pool, maybe half an hour before the shoe releases, and then they draw them at random. They draw them at random. So let's say there's 1,000 shoes and there's 1,000 people apply. You've got 1 in 10 chance. The app is notorious for oops, not this time. Better luck next time. Screen. But yeah, it's quite famous for having very low win percentages, because a lot of people come in with bots or computer programs to be able to try and beat the system.
Right. Okay. Well, that thank you. We'll come back to you in a second. I'm going to bring in Derek now, if I can. Hi, Derek. So Derek is he's the senior director of StockX Europe. So StockX is a marketplace where people buy and sell not just sneakers, but all kinds of collectibles. That's right, Derek, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
And you're also a self-proclaimed sneakerhead. You've right from your teenage years as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm originally from Canada, born and raised in Saskatchewan, which is kind of like the Midwestern prairie of Canada. Not, a million people, 100,000 lakes. It's pretty sparse. So it's not a lot of sneakers finding their way into my hometown originally, but yeah, certainly through all my teenage years, been relying on this global culture and the ways of exchanging internationally to get my hands on all the stuff I've wanted since I was a teenager.
So this is your dream job, right? You're living your best life right now, right?
Yeah, I think so. I was actually the first person hired by StockX outside of America 3.5 years ago to help bring this business internationally. And so it was really an opportunistic and lucky timing of being so tapped into the culture and recognizing the business opportunity, but it was also kind of convergence of my personal passions and hobbies and my obsession with marketplace dynamics and background in consumer behavioral economics and just marketplace dynamics. So it was kind of like the perfect intersection of my passion and kind of like cerebral passions as well.
So I know you guys have done quite a lot of research or analysis about the financial performance of different sneakers and things. I know Zab has got some slides on that in a second, but can you give us like the top line sort of headlines in terms of sneaker values, how they compare against other asset classes, that kind of thing?
Sure. I mean, I guess there's just a few really important, simple dynamics to keep in mind that makes this all kind of why it's such a stable and kind of predictable asset class, if you want to go with that nomenclature. One, it's very simply a function of supply and demand economics, right? I mean, there's so much incredible resonance for a bunch of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll explore here, in the product, in the medium, and then in kind of niches within the medium. And so that creates that resonance, that depth of narrative within the product from a performance angle, if we're talking about Michael Jordan, or from a Tom Sachs or a Damien Hirst or Takashi Murakami. There's so much depth of resonance in there that it creates an incredible amount of demand. And the brands are very deliberate. Sometimes, to Ligaya's comments earlier, it was an accident that there was this scarcity relative to they would have fulfilled the demand if they could, or if they knew that it existed. Or sometimes it's been in modern times, it's much more of a deliberate exercise. They're creating scarcity deliberately to generate a halo effect across the rest of their brand, where they know that they're going to leave people wanting more. And so if you look at it, there's a shoe last year that released just about a year ago now, which was one of the top performing women's sneakers of all time. That's in the display at the museum, called the Off-White Jordan 4 Sale, and it retailed for 160 pounds. Nike doesn't publish the number of shoes that they produce for these releases, but very quickly the next day, in the smaller or in the larger sizes especially, of that shoe, it was reselling for well over £1,000. So incredible resonance with the shoe, incredible amount of demand. And fast forward to around now, they've just recently released a very strikingly similar colorway of that Jordan 4 in much, much higher volumes, and it's sold out straight away. And it's not reselling for the same volumes, but there's definitely a spillover demand. Nike did the same thing with the Travis Scott Jordan 1, had the same kind of demand, resold for £1,000. And then in October of last year, they released the Mocha Jordan 1. Hundreds of thousands of more pairs, resale premiums much, much more stable. But they're leveraging this spillover halo effect of that very, very exclusive release to then drive traction in a much higher volume. And then there's lots of other examples of this. So that's one, is looking at the supply and demand economics and how that relates to scarcity, and why that scarcity exists in the first place in terms of how it builds a halo for the brand. So that's one fundamental. Then the second part of this is why I think it becomes a really predictably reliable and stable asset class, is because of the nature of consumption. Our marketplace relies on dead stock consumer goods. So
explain dead stock,
exactly,
the non-trainer people.
So dead stock used to refer to, in retail, stock that didn't sell, that was still brand new condition. It was dead stock. It was out of season. You would send it back, back to the wholesaler, or it would be something you'd have to find other ways to do, go in a different part of the life cycle. But it was brand new condition, just maybe out of season, let's say. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but just for lack of a better term. Yeah. And so when in sneaker culture, when you talk about dead stock, you're just talking about shoes that are in brand new condition. And that's the most important thing. So we only allow the trading of brand new, unworn products on our platform. And collectors like me, and probably collectors like some other people here. I don't know Harry, how many of your pairs are unworn. So I'm not going to project any behavior on you, but I very much, the shoes I have here, I wear my shoes for more than anything. But you have these people that collect them and that have essentially archived these great products for generations in some cases. And so but because these are a consumable, because they're already scarce and limited, there's already a demand effect. Even if demand doesn't increase over time, just the nature of this being a consumable, there'll be fewer and fewer available products over time. So it's inevitable that the price will go up because the demand will outstrip the available supply of that new condition item.
Just on that, sorry to interrupt, my boss, Katie Bannock-Smith, has gone straight to the heart of the matter and would like to know what is the most expensive pair of trainers that have been sold on the platform. Do you know that?
The most expensive pair of shoes sold on the platform, I believe, this is the Nike SB Paris Dunk, which has been sold a few times, quite many times on the platform, but I think the highest price it traded for was 52,000 euros. Now that's on our platform in the past 12 months. I think if anything's happened in the last 24 hours, then but it's not uncommon for you to see shoes trade between 10 and 20,000 pounds.
So actually, this feels like a good time to cut to Zav, if that's all right. Zav, can you walk us through just some of the headline figures from the SenseMaker guide that you pulled together?
Yeah. Thank you, Derek, because most of the data is taken from StockX. So I think to some extent I might be repeating things he's already said. So this is kind of quite an informative graph in showing how shoes and the most popular shoes can be kind of used or treated as investments. So this is the S&P 500 stock market index. Its growth since January 2020, set against the growth in kind of resale value of the Nike MX 1s and the Air Jordan 4s. So actually, if you were kind of selling your stocks and you were investing in Air Jordan 4s, you would have got a much bigger return in them since kind of January 2020. And then if we go to the second slide. So this is, apologies, the text is quite small. So these are the top brands on StockX ranked by total trade, so people buying and selling. You can see Air Jordans are most popular, but in terms of kind of profit on individual brands, Yeezys are ones where you can kind of make a lot of money on the site historically. And then if we go to the third slide, so I think Derek was getting at this a bit at the beginning. So this is trying to demonstrate actually some of the resilience of the kind of sneaker market. So treating December 2019 as a baseline, if we compare sneakers with kind of the fashion industry in general, you can see that kind of sales fell more drastically in the fashion industry in the kind of early months of the pandemic, and recovered a lot more slowly, whereas even by April 2020, I think this, the source says Riskified, I think this is StockX as well. You can see even by April 2020, the sneaker market had kind of already recovered. And then if we go to the fourth slide, so I think the guy kind of hinted at this before. So this is the kind of growth in total number of sneaker sales, looking at men's sneakers and women's sneakers. And you can see that there's been a lot of space for the women's sneaker market to grow in the past few years. And you can see obviously that the women's sneaker sales have grown astronomically compared to men's, even if more men's sneakers are still sold overall. And then the final slide is just getting at something which I think we will probably discuss later, which is the so-called dark side of the sneaker market. You saw earlier on that Jordans are a really popular sneaker. It obviously means that they're a popular sneaker for people to fake. On the left-hand side, we have the three sneakers which were most faked or had most people attempting to fake them in 2016, and then compared to 2020. And you can see that 5 of the 6 back in 2016 and now in 2020, or last year in 2020, 5 of the 6 were Jordans. And that's everything.
That's great. Derek, do you have a sense on just on the last kit that Sav just mentioned? I'm presuming that these are like high-end counterfeits rather than stuff that gets sold on the beach when you go on holiday.
It's fascinating. I mean, I think there's actually grades of quality of counterfeit goods that are market. I mean, so 2 of the shoes that I spoke to were on that right side of the most fake: the Jordan 1 Travis Scott, the Jordan 4 Sale, and the one at the top, the Jordan 1 Chicago Off-White. Now, there are the Jordan 1 Off-White Chicago resells around, I think right now probably around £3,000 per pair on average, give or take. I mean, it fluctuates a little bit, but it's somewhere around there, maybe even more now. I haven't looked at it recently. Now, if you go online, if you know where to source fakes, there are people who are promoting their AAA class counterfeit versions of that shoe that they will sell advertised as counterfeit for more than £500 per pair wholesale. So they're actually making more off of the counterfeit than Nike does. And Nike limited this to say, again, they don't publish the figures, but let's say, I think it was rumored to be as few as, less than 100,000 pairs, less than 50,000 pairs for that pair of shoe. Whereas the counterfeiters certainly don't have any incentive to limit their supply. They're not creating a halo effect for but there are brands of high quality regarded counterfeiters that are making, selling advertised as £500 per pair because it's such a good quality fake. And I think that is just to articulate one, there's that tier all the way down to the kind of what you would see in the kind of beachside markets of that same shoe with a less kind of voracious counterfeit. And so, I mean, it is in all extremes, but there are tiers within the counterfeit industry. And then some people buy those knowing that it's a counterfeit, wanting to wear that and express themselves through the aesthetic, and they don't care about the IP that it infringes. But many, many people are taking that and then trying to exploit the massive demand I referred to by trying to pass those counterfeits off as the £3,000 original.
Sure.
And that's really wherein lies, I think, the the tension and real conflict in our society.
I'm going to bring in a minute, if it's okay. I see an old friend of mine, Andrew Missingham, who I know from a past life in advertising, is in the room, and he's made he's come up with a really interesting question, which I'd like to put to the experts. I guess just to finish up though, Derek, before we go to Andrew, what in terms of the, I guess, could you give us just like a quick, for anyone who's sort of thinking of looking at buying a pair of high-end sneakers, what are the telltale things that people should look out for, which ring alarm bells for like a moody knockoff copy?
Well, the best thing to look at first is the box. Don't buy a pair of shoes that you can't see the box. Counterfeiters will invest a lot of money in getting the threading right, getting everything about the shoe right. But it takes a lot to get the box right, to get the paper right, to get the premium feel, to get some of those dimensions. You can find a lot of references online, but I would look at the quality of the construction of the box before you even look at the shoe.
And is it like is it like toys where it's always worth more with the original packaging, or is a shoebox just a shoebox?
Well, I mean, it's definitely worth more with the packaging, and we won't allow. Again, it is very hard sometimes to determine the fake within the shoe, but you can determine it's a fake 9 times out of 10 before you even look at the shoe.
Right.
And so I think that's a really important thing to consider, that it's I would be very mistrusting of anyone who knows that the value of that pair of shoes, they don't have the box, right? That's already a signal. Don't buy a pair of expensive shoes without a box.
Excellent. Okay, good advice. Andrew, if we've got you.
Yes.
Andrew, how you doing?
Very well, thank you, Mark. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you. I was really interested in the question that you posed about how today's Jordans could become tomorrow's Chucks when like the demands of like, I guess, the sporting capability might change. I think this might be one for, I mean, do you want to sort of ask your question actually?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mark. I think for Harry as well as Ligaya, I think what interests me about Jordans, of course, is they're a brand that started from a sports position and a sports star. A little bit unlike Chuck, with Chuck Taylors as well, but for Converse. But basically, what happens is, what's happened with Chucks is Converse still exists. It's continued to try and make shoes and try and innovate, but their basic product that they sell tons of are Chucks, right? But nobody plays basketball in those anymore. They've basically become sportswear, right? What people wear because they have a sports heritage and they kind of look cool. And if you think about Jordans, you've got like AJ1s and you've got kind of original Jordans that people now wear as sportswear as well. What's going to stop Jordans from going the same way as Converse have and basically becoming a heritage brand that's got nothing really to do with the sport, but basically their business is that sports heritage and sports association?
Ligaya, do you want to take first stab at that before Harry?
Hi, can you hear me? I think it's a really interesting question. I think if Nike stopped innovating and stopped putting a lot of money into creating actual sports products, which they still do, then something like that might be happening. Obviously, Jordan is a separate brand, and actually it is much more of a lifestyle brand than maybe Jordan and Nike would like to say. But I do think that the fact that with Converse, it didn't continue to change. And I think what's interesting about the Chucks is they actually didn't change for 50 years in the first place. So they started in 1917 and all the way into the 60s, it more or less stayed the same. So they, as a brand, never innovated because they kind of came from the kind of rubber, the plimsoll, the rubber-soled sports shoe, and it was kind of a little bit generic, and they didn't really change their product. And I think what Nike does is change it enough so that it feels like innovation, and is still functional, and therefore potentially, and also the culture story with Jordan is so different to Chuck Taylor. Chuck Taylor was a traveling salesman, and he wasn't really cool, right? So not that, they could debate whether Michael Jordan is still cool and whether he ever really was cool, but he was positioned as cool, and the kind of the association with him and the brand is very different to Chuck Taylor. Chucks took their own, they took on a different life because other people took them there, other subcultures took them there, not because of them being, cool trainers. They're a blank canvas, whereas Jordans were never really a blank canvas. Just I hope that makes some sense.
No, that's great. And Harry, from your point of view as a collector, like, when do you get a sense that a once desirable pair of sneakers might be going off the boil a bit?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. What I think is, as Ligaya said, that Jordan's reached that mythical level that a lot of other athletes don't permeate. You know, a lot of people, the word GOAT, greatest of all time, is often stemmed from Michael Jordan. And if you look at the Jordan line, as Ligaya said, there's a lot of lifestyle models, there's a lot of current basketball models, which are probably fantastic to play with, but there's not much hype around them. And will there ever be hype around them? Probably not like a Jordan 1, because Jordan was seen doing his fantastic feats in those shoes. This shoe, the Jordan 3, was the shoe that created the Jumpman logo. It was Nike Air on the back of the shoe first, and then he did the fantastic dunk and created the infamous Jumpman logo and they were placed on the shoes then after. Once you get to beyond the 13, I don't think, until you get to the 23, which is iconic because that was his number, I don't think there's any number Jordan that goes through the roof. You know, it's your Jordan 1 through 11, which are known as the Jordans that really, really sell. And they were the Jordans that were seen on his feet doing, from the flu game on the Jordan 12 to winning the championship in the Jordan 6 and whoever he dunked on. So I think that's where those shoes got their popularity. And I think Nike's very clever with what they do. They bring those shoes back out. And the Jordan 1, I'll give you an example. I don't like to flex this shoe at all, but I've got the Jordan 1 Dior here, and they bought it out. That was a collab with the fashion brand Dior, and they brought it back out, the first Jordan 1 to a pinnacle status, and tied it in with a high fashion brand, which is almost unheard of in the sneaker game. And, I'm sure that will be the future for these shoes, to elevate them to even further heights and make them even more unattainable to, as Derek said, to drive the rest of the brand, drive Jordan's lifestyle brand and drive Jordan's, current, current basketball brand, which has got high tech and not much premium resell on it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's interesting, actually, the guy was mentioning plimsolls earlier. There was a lot of reminiscence and nostalgia for those awful black sort of tire-fronted, elasticated plimsolls that we all used to have to wear at school. Yeah, it's just giving me the shudders a little bit. I'm going to ask if Liz can come in, who's just made an interesting point about trainers and where they sit in culture.
Oh gosh, I mean, I absolutely do not know about this. I'm a very uncool middle-aged woman, so feeling out of my depth. I was caught out yesterday saying that, well, trainers are a bit like fish. So this is where we're at, guys, managing your expectations. But no, somebody said about whether a trainer is a trainer because it originates with sport, and whether the relationship between the shoe and the sporting origin. I was just wondering, so I used to work, you wouldn't believe it now, but I did used to work in fashion publishing, went to Elle magazine and things. People were obsessed with trends and collabs and got very excited about that stuff. So those ones that look like socks, where it's got a sole and then a sock, and I think it originates with Balenciaga. I think they're disgusting, but people like them. Is that a trainer, or is that just a sock with a sole? And because it starts at Balenciaga, which is not a sports brand, does that ever become a trainer? Don't know. And then I was saying at the beginning that I feel the most affinity trainer-wise with Adidas as a brand, or Adidas, as we used to be encouraged to call it in the 80s. And I like Forest Hills. I do own Nike Internationalists. I have a pair of Nike Air Spans as well. But I sort of think of, I have some awareness of the relationship between, Run DMC and hip hop culture and specific trainer models, if that's what you call them, styles. So I think more about the relationship between trainers and music. When I was at university, everybody wore Gazelles. It was just what you had on your feet, because you were listening to the Stone Roses and you were listening to the Charlatans, and that's just what you had on your feet. Everybody had Gazelles on their feet. And I don't think about them in terms of sport. I think about them in terms of music. I don't know if that's just me.
No, Ligaya, does that bear out in your experience from when you were putting the exhibition together? it's like a stronger association with pop culture and music perhaps nowadays than with sport?
Yes, I think sneaker culture, if you talk about sneaker culture as a term, is purely lifestyle. I think it comes, originally comes maybe from an association with basketball. I think most people most trainer collectors have that story with basketball and basketball stars, but really, truly, like the more mass market it's to do with kind of music culture, subcultures, and you kind of and your peers. I think effectively, I think a lot of what is cool is what you see in your immediate surroundings. So I think there was a question earlier on in the chat around localization of trends, and I think before the internet really took over, that was very visible, and you could really see that, and London still does have, Air Maxes are very London, whereas like that's not a very US thing to be wearing Air Maxes. I think they're coming in now, but things are more globalized now. But I think truly sneaker culture, as opposed to wearing sports shoes for comfort or for the gym, is to do with your kind of lifestyle, I guess, in a weird way. And that speaks to the fashion question also. So people who are wearing fashion Balenciaga trainers are they're leaning into a culture that is to do with, they're into designer brands. They think it's cool, whatever, that's what they wear. They're not wearing it because it's, functional in any way or form. So I hope that answers the question.
And thank you. And actually, I'm going to bring in Sonia, who's in the room, who's been making some interesting points about kind of the hype that surrounds Jordans in particular. Hi, Sonia. How you doing?
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Are you wearing a pair of Jordans right now?
I'm actually wearing a pair of Mulberry trainers. So it's fashion plus trainers. Excellent. But I realized Mulberry is discontinuing their shoe range. So now I'm thinking, I shouldn't be wearing them. I should be reselling them.
Go out and buy all the last pairs that you can find.
Exactly. So I guess the point I was making was, so you mentioned about the hype about, around Michael Jordan, because there seemed to be this whole thing about Jordan's collection. All those collectors, there's a lot of things evolving around Jordans. Why is Air Jordans or Michael Jordan so prevalent in collecting trainers? Because I remember in the 90s, I think, was it Adidas releasing some Kobe Bryant trainers? So like, it never really picked up in terms of hype.
Derek, do you want to take a stab at responding to that?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think it's really to understand. I mean, the phenomenon that was Michael Jordan is a phenomenon of itself that has, like, I mean, to Andrew's question earlier, I mean, Jordan is already a legacy brand. It's already trading on the legacy of Michael Jordan. He's been retired for 20 years, and they continue to lean into that heritage of his legacy, the nostalgia around him, his accomplishments, and his almost deified status that he's achieved in the sport of basketball. So I think that there's that element of it. It's like, it's a once in a lifetime, potentially, athlete that was married with Tinker Hatfield, maybe a once in a generation designer in the medium. And so, it's really the combination of those two that created Jordan, that created the Jordan 3. The Jordan 3 was Tinker's, one of his most prolific designs that actually kept Michael Jordan at Nike. People forget when Michael Jordan joined Nike, it was Reebok was the dominant sneaker brand at the time. Reebok was the freestyle had been dominant as a silhouette. Nike was still a kind of upstart American brand. And so I think it's really what they did together, but just truly the power of Michael Jordan, his story. And then Nike's done a great job of perpetuating his legacy and storytelling around it. So when you look at the collectors and you look at America at the time, I mean, it was ubiquitous. There were people in New York that said that they wouldn't wear Jordan 1s because everybody was wearing them. And I think when we look at the kind of the generation of collector now, so much of the appetite for Jordans now is very deeply connected to nostalgia for an older generation like myself to that era, as well as buying into his legacy in the way that they've kind of perpetuated. So there's a few different elements of that with Jordan itself, but it's really, I think, at its essence, the marriage of Tinker Hatfield and Michael Jordan himself.
And actually, so my colleague Zav has just made an interesting point about gentrification of certain brands, and it kind of ties in with a question that Andrew Butler was asking earlier. Andrew, have we got you here?
Yes, I'm here.
And you talk about like which brands to speculate on.
Well, none in particular. It's just, I think the point that I was making. By the way, I've just walked past the size of Carnaby Street, which is, probably one of the coolest spots in the whole of the country on this theme. It's more just does StockX look at future trends? Are they thinking, are they going to, like, is the world going to run dry at some stage, or do they think, oh no, like Yeezys have come along, Balenciagas have come along in recent years, and have got like incredibly trendy. They've got incredibly fashionable, but also have got their values rocketed up. Are they looking at what comes next, or do they just kind of ride that wave and then hope that the next one comes along?
No, I think that's a great question, Andrew. I think a couple of things there. One, I guess the first point I would make is that sneakers are really a medium. They're not a trend within itself. There are trends and fads within sneakers, and over the last 5 years, it's been a jockeying between Yeezy and Adidas and Nike and Jordan and New Balance recently. Balenciaga has had its own trends within their own sneakers between Triple S, which is this. If you haven't seen a Triple S or held a Triple S, it weighs about 5 kilos per shoe. Athletes love it. I think it's one of the most hideous things I've ever seen. It makes the speed trainer that I think Liz referenced, the sock runner, look like an absolutely divine and sleek in comparison. So there's trends within it, but I think for us as a marketplace, knowing that it's a medium, I think that I'm very confident in the longevity of what it is in terms of how it can go. I make often comparison of like hip hop and rap music when it became on the radio in the late 90s. People said, oh, this is the death of this culture. It's the death of hip hop. It's gone mainstream. But in reality, in the past 22 years since hip hop really broke through in the late 90s, it's bigger than ever. It's more diverse than ever. And it's a really dynamic universe of music that kind of bends genres all together that have evolved out of that. And I think we're starting to see, as sneaker culture becomes ubiquitous, becomes so mainstream, there's larger subcultures and niches within it that we're seeing the brands start to cater to. So skate shoes and runner culture, they're having more and more fans. So I think as we look at future brands like New Balance are very, very quietly becoming iconic. They've been iconic, but they're taking more and more market share from certain corners of sneaker culture. People who were wearing Off-Whites at Fashion Week 2 years ago, you're seeing a lot more of them wearing very limited release New Balances and things like that. So I think we're watching and seeing a lot of these things happen. One of the things that will be an interesting tension in sneaker culture is it's very expensive to develop IP to make a very comfortable sneaker. I mean, when we look at Yeezys are really, really comfortable and they have a lot of technology in the Boost sole. If Mark and I want to go and start a sneaker brand tomorrow, it's going to be really expensive and really, really hard to create an independent sneaker brand that can really compete with Nike, Adidas, New Balance, Reebok. That's why you see the same brands, let alone how much that they have a market hold from the business perspective. So that, I think, is that tension with a consumer trend that we see being much more wanting to support the empowered independent creator directly. Kobe Bryant, before he passed away, was actually in the process of setting up a player-owned sneaker brand that was supposed to be, kind of his magnum opus after as why he was going to leave Nike. And so I think that's a really important dynamic to consider when we look at the future of sneaker culture, is how will these big brands that are, in many ways at odds with consumer culture and where they want to go in terms of supporting independent creatives, how is that going to be reconciled with the actual product penetration in the marketplace? That I think will be hard.
And that's really interesting, because you talked about how the market will develop, and presumably, well, not presumably, definitely, sneakerheads get older, right? My colleague Emily made an interesting point about how her dad only owns 2 pairs of shoes, school shoes, and some white high tops. Emily, can you let me know how old your dad is? Because I'm in a quandary. I've got a pair of Nike high tops and I never wear them because I think I might be too old for them, but I'll take the lead from your dad. So I guess actually, if we can go to Harry for this one. Harry, you were an avid collector and trader in your teens. And from the chat we had the other day, you were like, oh, I just chased the grails I want now. Excellent use of the lingo there. Do you think that this will be with you forever? Like, or do you think it's something that you might kind of drop?
Definitely, that's a good question. I think that I will always have an appreciation. I don't think I'll be as crazed by it as I was in my peak, picking up, every month at least 2 pairs. I think now I appreciate the pairs that I need and want much more. So I'm chasing a certain few silhouettes, and I think I saw a question in the chat saying how much would you pay, and I don't really pay resale. I would pay a bit above. But I would never pay pure peak resale. If I don't get it, I don't get it. That's my motto now. So there's a pair of Jordan 8 Aquas I really want. There's a couple of Jordan 3s I want, a couple of Jordan 4s, and as well as those Lunar Air Max 90s I was talking about for other reasons. But I will have an appreciation. I think I'll always be part of the scene, whether it will be actively buying or glancing from a distance, trying to cop some pairs here and there. But I don't think it'll ever be gone completely. I'll always have my piles of boxes in a room in my house. I know I will.
Actually, I think we have a picture, don't we, Connor, of the Lunars that Harry just mentioned. If we can bring those up, because they're really quite an extraordinary pair of shoes. Yeah, there we are. Harry, can you just talk us through what's going on here?
Yeah, so I understand they're not the most visually appealing, but it's the message behind the shoe and why. I'm a huge space freak. In uni, I did an astrophysics unit doing a BA, which was almost, they all try to kick me out of it. That's how much I love space. And this shoe was to commemorate the 45th anniversary of the Apollo 11, a lunar landing. And so Nike released it at 1 past midnight on the day. They put their new Lunarlon technology in the sole. As you can see, if you know your Air Max 90s, that's not a traditional Air Max 90 sole unit. It's got the ripples. It's a bit more comfortable. It's got a fully reflective upper, which is 3M. Which reflects the sun hitting the moon and gives a full reflection back. And then you've obviously got the US flag, homage to the flag being pinned into the surface of the moon. So all in all, it's quite a geeky shoe, but for those reasons, I love it completely. And it's sold out. I think it's probably selling for about 500-600. Probably Derek's the one to consult on that, but that's what I'd say the price is going right now.
And in terms of that kind of, I guess, not growing up, the aging sneaker culture, I guess, Ligaya, do you have a sense of kind of, first of all, if there are shoes or trainers that are coming out that might appeal, or have you noticed a design trend rather in trainers that kind of appeal to people in their 30s and 40s and 50s, not just teenagers?
Dan Smith? I mean, I don't actually think that it would. I think that trainers will become what everyone wears, even in their old age. I think it's almost become like what shoes were, because there is so many different trainers available that, some are very, very, very discreet. Some are more leery. I think it really, like, you can wear trainers all your life. And I think it is a generational thing, but I think the people who made trainer or sneaker cultures, sneakers into sneaker culture, are now in their 50s effectively, and are still wearing sneakers. And I think now what I think is interesting is I worked on a show in sportswear and fashion 12 years ago, and no one in the kind of female kind of curatorial fashion historian environment believed that sportswear would be anything to do with what women wear. And it is totally that now. And I think growing up with sneakers now will mean that many, many women also will continue to wear sneakers until they're, 85. I don't know, but I don't think there's ever going to be that moment again where, you're too old to wear, a sweatshirt or a t-shirt and a pair of sneakers. I think we're beyond that.
I mean, that is music to my ears. Can we go to Gregory Mulligan, who's just made a fascinating point about trainers as a way of self-expression. Gregory, are you here? It's that kind of awkward pause moment. If we can find Gregory. No. Okay, we'll come back to Gregory. So I guess A quick question then, I guess, for Derek. Is there a danger that the kind of the sums of money involved could have a detrimental effect on sneaker culture? You know, you've got a lot of teenagers, they're spending money on shoes. They're not old enough to buy and sell on the stock exchange, but presumably they can buy and sell brand new box fresh trainers for quite large sums of money. Is that an accusation that's ever kind of leveled at StockX or other marketing platforms?
I think not in a negative way. I mean, I think, to be honest, we partner with universities and lots of different, academic institutions with data about how we can use our marketplace dynamics to promote and encourage and educate with in areas of financial literacy. So I think, look, most parents, you can learn about the stock market through very tangible assets and things that you own, which is a much more interesting way to actually explore how a stock market functions, as opposed to trying to teach about security and all the different anomalies that exist in those stock markets. So I think, in terms of chasing that premium, I think to glorify the business side of it can be detrimental to the cultural side of it, which essentially underpins its livelihood. So I always say, as a marketplace, if Nike stopped making shoes tomorrow, that'll be very strange for us, but our marketplace would continue to go on because it just reacts and reflects whatever is popular. But if the cultural resonance, what makes people want these things and want to participate in this very interesting and dynamic cultural conversation, if the resonance dies, then the marketplace dies. So I think that is really where the tension between resale premium, brands can very easily pivot from saying, hey, we're creating resonance and lots of people want this stuff and it makes our brand better with this spillover effect. It's one thing to recognize that, it's another thing to chase that. And I think the brands that will thrive are the ones who create resonance, and the resale premium and demand comes at the consequence of that resonance, and it's not the desired intent. And I think that is maybe an important nuance to think about when we look at cultural longevity that I think is really delicate.
So we've reached the end of our hour. That's gone super quick. And I'm just going to finish up by asking each of our guests to give us a kind of a really short, concise answer to something celebratory. I want to understand just why sneakers are brilliant. Like what is the attraction? Why do we have this emotional attachment to them? And if you can just kind of sum it up. If we go to Harry first, please.
For me, it must be the community that I've made around it, whether it's through my job, university, and friends, people on and off the basketball court. I've got a huge network based around shoes, and I can say that they're a great network. So for me, it brings tremendous happiness and memories.
And for you, Derek?
I just think what it represents as a medium or a convergence point of some of the most inspiring corners of our broader culture, whether it's contemporary art, contemporary design, sport, music, just all of these incredibly powerful pillars of culture in their own respective ways. At some point or in some way, they all converge and intersect through a sneaker and can be told or articulated through that. Damien Hirst, Tom Sachs, Michael Jordan, Phoebe Philo, Kim Jones, and on and on and on. How many? Mark Newson, who's got some great shoes that Ligaya has put in the curation. How many other mediums can represent such a diverse set of incredible people? And I think that as a medium, I think that's what will captivate me from my teens to my, hopefully my early part of my next century.
And Ligaya, I'll give you the last word. The attraction of trainers. Oh, sorry, we could just unmute you a second. Sorry. Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I just said, oh dear, the first and the last word, but it's telling me my internet connection is unstable, so it might not come through to you. But I think from a design historian perspective, I think they are some of the most interesting objects that have come through, not really from designers in a weird way, even though there's been great designers that have made and created trainers, but actually have come from young people and diverse young inner city people. So I think that's for me what is the most interesting and the most exciting, and continue to be like that. So that's the exciting bit.
Thank you. Everyone, we're a few minutes over time, so I'm about to get into trouble from my boss. But a massive thanks to Ligaya, Derek, and Harry for joining us this evening. I think you'll agree we've just barely scratched the surface of what is a completely fascinating scene and culture. Go and see Sneakers Unboxed. It runs until the 24th of October. Enjoy the rest of your very warm Wednesday night, and hopefully I'll see you soon.